Close the door. NUS Vice Provost, Undergraduate Education and Student Life, Professor Bernard Tan, Dr. Alan Wong, colleagues and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2017 Educator-in-Residence Program, EIRP, Ruth Wong Memorial Lecture on Education, titled, Why Recognizing and Rewarding Teaching is Critical to Achieving an Excellent Student Experience, to be presented by Denise Chalmers, Emeritus Professor, University of Western Australia and National Senior Teaching Fellow, Australian Government Office for Learning and Teaching. I'm Shindy, and I'll be the MC for this afternoon's lecture. The Educator-in-Residence program is part of our efforts at CDTL to strengthen teaching and learning. The program aims to connect the NUS academic community with distinguished educators from around the world. Since 2010, we are pleased to have had Professors Dan Bernstein from the University of Kansas, Ian Hay from Flinders University, Mike Keppel from the University of Southern Queensland, Kathleen Quinlan from the University of Oxford, and Roberto Di Napoli from St. George's at the University of London as CDTL's past educators in residence. We are very happy to have Professor Chalmers visit NUS as the Educator-in-Residence for 2017. Besides this lecture, Prof. Chalmers will also participate in several discussions and meetings with members of the NUS academic community. May I now invite Associate Professor Johann Gertzimmer, Director CDTL, to give the welcome address. Prof. Gertzimmer, please.
Guest of honor, NUS Vice Provost Professor Bernard Tan, Dr. Alan Wong, NUS Educator-in-Residence Emeritus Professor Denise Chalmers, guests, colleagues, and friends. It is an honor to welcome you to this afternoon's Ruth Wong Memorial Lecture. This is a signature event among CDTL initiatives aimed at fostering reflection on academic practice and collegial discussion within and across the NUS community, and also beyond it, on topics that are relevant to our varied roles as academics. Among these roles, teaching is one of the most important, since it directly impacts on student learning and on the student experience. In the audience this afternoon, we have colleagues from various departments, as well as from centers and institutes that support student learning in important ways that may not necessarily be involved in direct instruction or classroom teaching. Importantly, there are also a number of students in the audience. We further welcome to NUS guests from other institutions in Singapore. Though the audience this afternoon is diverse, I believe we all share one common goal: to find ever better ways of enhancing student learning through enhancing our own practice at the university. I would like to extend a special warm welcome to Dr. Ellen Wong. This afternoon's event is held in honor of Dr. Wong's esteemed sister, Dr. Ruth Wong Hie King. Dr. Ruth Wong was an extraordinary individual. Her interest in and deep commitment to the cause of education and her achievements in this area make her a well-known and highly respected educationist in the history of Singapore. In 1939, at the age of 21, soon after leaving the then Raffles College, Dr. Ruth Wong formally started her career in education, a career which took her to several countries and made an impact on a great number of people for the next 40 years. She was highly respected as a person, academic, scholar, and educational administrator. Ruth Wong passed away in 1982. She was then only 64 years old. Welcome again, Dr. Wong. Ladies and gentlemen, now please allow me very briefly to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Emeritus Professor Denise Chalmers. There's a lot I can say, but I'll try to keep it brief so we have more time for the lecture and also for Q&A. Denise has been actively involved in higher education for many years, over 25 of those in positions of academic leadership at top Australian research universities. She was Winthrop Professor and Director of the Centre for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning, CATL, not CDTL, at the University of Western Australia until 2014, and earlier Director of the Teaching and Educational Development Institute, TEDI, at the University of Queensland. She was Foundation Director of the Carrick Institute for Learning and Teaching in Higher Education, later named the Australian Learning and Teaching Council, and subsequently the Office for Learning and Teaching. And she served as President as well as Vice President of the Council of Australian Directors of Academic Development, or CADAD. Denise has won numerous grants and awards and has published widely on university teaching. Among the institutional, national and international initiatives and projects that she has initiated and also that she has led, one that is of particular relevance for the lecture topic this afternoon is an important recent project to develop and embed teaching quality criteria, indicators and standards for Australian higher education. This work on educational evaluation and ways of evidencing teaching achievement has been highly influential both in Australia and internationally. Given her work on quality teaching, it is timely that Denise is visiting NUS at this juncture, when we as a university are seriously thinking and indeed rethinking about what good teaching is, how it relates to learning outcomes, as well as the student experience, and how to encourage and support good teaching. The topic of this afternoon's lecture is why recognizing and rewarding teaching is critical to achieving an excellent student experience. Please join me in welcoming Professor Chalmers to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here and to join you and to talk about this topic, which is very dear to my heart. And so, but I am a little intimidated because I was told by Ruth Wong's sister, Ellen, that she was a charismatic and wonderful presenter. I mean, no pressure. So I will do my best to honour Ruth Wong, but I do thank the Ruth Wong Foundation or the opportunity to come here and to give this presentation. And I look forward to your points and your questions later. So, what is an excellent student experience? Is this what really matters? And we have people on all sides of the spectrum that say education is about education and learning, and a job shouldn't be the end game. But very few of our students come to university and hope they don't get a job. So it's part of the mixture. Of course we want students to come here to learn, to be inspired, to enjoy, and to want to learn. But we also must understand that both their families and the students, and indeed us, when we first came to study, the thought of learning for learning's sake was perhaps not front of mind. We wanted to learn, we wanted a job, we wanted a career, and we wanted to improve the quality of our life. And many of these things are values that we hold, and they're not opposite to each other. It is fine to want to have both, but are we going to be doing this? And how do we do this? So my questions are directed to you at NUS for questions. And what does an excellent student experience at NUS entail? Is it something specific and deliberate around NUS that provides an NUS experience? They're certainly questions we're asking in universities around the world. Does it make any difference what university it is? You are the premier university of this state, although there might be one other university that's challenging you, particularly on that. It caused a shock, I believe. But there is a particular thing. What is it about NUS? And what is it about the student experience? And by the student experience, I don't mean did they have fun, did they party a lot. It's also did they learn? Did they achieve the goals of our degrees that we wanted them to achieve? So the student experience is not just that they are here, but that's important, and what that experience and value is for them, but also did they learn, and what did they learn, and how did they learn it, and is that an NUS experience? So why should it matter? We have institutional reputation and prestige. So by all means you are the highly selective university. But do students go there and say, well, yes, and it probably influenced me getting a job, but is that all that really matters? What's the prestige? Will people come back? Will they proudly say, I was an NUS graduate? Will they recommend to their children that they also study at NUS? If they become teachers or engaged with, will they be persuading their grandchildren that NUS is a good experience? And now you've got a lot of competition in Singapore, and you've got a lot of competition internationally. Is you're the university that they should be sending their children and students to? And your reputation. Yeah, it's a really good research institution, but gee, the teaching's horrible. Do you want that? And is that the case? Certainly that's a reputation that a lot of research universities have. Yeah, it's great, but the teaching's not so good. If you want really good teaching, go to another university. Is that the reputation and the prestige that NUS should have? We certainly have an obligation to our students, to our community, and to our nation. And that's an interesting one. I constantly hear, and I've worked in highly prestigious research universities, where you hear from many of the lecturers, oh, if only we had better quality students. The quality of the students is going down now that we're starting to let all these people in that shouldn't be here. Well, actually, we're still picking up the top 10% of our students. This is highly selective. You are selecting the very best. So we have an obligation to those students. And if we're even selecting not the very best, we have an obligation to those students. And we have an obligation to provide them the very best education we possibly can, not hope they survive, which is sometimes the case. The quick or the dead. If they're not suited for here, they can go somewhere else. Well, I think if we've accepted those students into our institution, we have an obligation to do what we can to make sure that they have every opportunity for success. Of course the students have to work, of course they have to learn, but we should not be putting any roadblocks in front. And we also need to remember that teaching is a key pillar of universities. We have research, but we have teaching as equal pillars. It's no good having a pillar up here and a pillar down here and another pillar there. Our building will fall down. So we need to have pillars of the university that are bearing an equal load and have equal value, so that the whole of the institution is solid. So how are you doing? It's very interesting to me. I work across a lot of universities and I see a lot of rhetoric saying, oh, we're really concerned about the student experience. The student experience is important and you see it in strategic documents, but you don't often see it put together with its central to also provide an excellent teacher, recognising and rewarding teaching. Okay, so we have student experience, oh, we'll put in new services and so on. But really, we haven't paid attention very closely until more recently that we need to recognise and reward our teachers, because they are at the coalface with our students. And we have typically recognised and rewarded our researchers to the exclusion or to the poor cousin of research. And we need to change that, and I'll explore that a little more. So we can recognise and reward a lot of things, but unless we recognise and reward things that are going to contribute to the student learning, then we work out of kilter as well. Have you seen any t-shirts like that around NUS lately?
No.
Perhaps that's something we can all plan for. Because we really see a lot of t-shirts like that around, I'm a physicist, I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist, I'm a psychologist, or I'm in the psychology department, but we don't see people proudly claiming that I'm a teacher of that. And I think that's something to sort of think about. So why might that be? And this is particularly true for research-intensive universities, but I find this is true for all universities everywhere. Prestige is conferred on disciplinary researchers, not teachers. And prestige has a different meaning than just promotion or level. It's sort of a respect. It's a kudos within your peers. The people who are the top researchers have it. The people who are just teachers in those faculties don't. And that's, I think, an issue. Greater teaching loads are assigned to people who do less research or who are less successful. And so the view is often amongst our colleagues is, well, those who don't research very well, they can teach. And you hear that often with heads of schools. So-and-so didn't get a grant and they're not a very good, so we'll increase their teaching as if it's not a specialised or a thing that might need skills and capacity for. So we have that attitudinal issue. Promotion, we've got heaps and heaps of papers and things to show that this is true. Promotion is based on teaching excellence is much less likely than research excellence. That conversation's changing, but it is still the case. Salaries and appointment levels are lower for those who do more teaching, particularly undergraduate teaching, and there's years and years of data to show that is still the case. Teaching-focused appointments are disproportionately represented in the lower levels and for short and limited term contracts, and more females are in those positions constantly, and that hasn't changed for 15 years. So it's an issue. Educational research is not regarded on the same level as disciplinary research, and evidence is dismissed. So there's a lot, there's 50, 60, 70 years of very good quality educational research that shows things around the quality of education, what are educationally effective practices, the use of student feedback, for example, and the robustness of that, and it gets dismissed. So as an example, 12,000, I think it's up to 12,000 now. No, that's a there's a lot of research. It is almost 12,000 of very good studies around student feedback on teaching. And all the meta-analysis all say it's very valid, it's reliable, and it's consistent. Now, what other discipline would they ignore such a vast volume of research and say, yeah, but? We wouldn't do that in physics, we wouldn't do it in science, we wouldn't do it in medicine, we wouldn't do it in psychology, but we do it in education. And it's a problem. And because we often use just my experience. Oh, and by discipline, that's fine. But in education, we'll do it this way. Teaching practice is undervalued. Anyone can teach. We don't need to worry about training anyone to teach because you're a researcher. Would we let our own children go to a teacher who wasn't trained? No. But we seem not to value it in higher education. Professional and personal identity is strongly tied to being a researcher in the discipline. Whenever you meet any of your colleagues, again, it's back to that point about wearing the t-shirt. Are you a physicist or are you a teacher of physics? And so we determine and describe ourselves. Everyone, my discipline is biochemistry, my discipline is history, my discipline is literature, my discipline is science. Not teacher of, unless you are a teacher. Okay, and leadership responses around teaching are typically focused on improving the individual. So-and-so, Professor Jones doesn't teach so well. Well, we'll get Professor Jones fixed. We'll send them off to go and do some training or whatever. But it's rarely thought of as a systemic issue. Thinking about it as a department. Who are the people in our department who are very good teachers, and how do we foster them as well as foster the researchers, and where there's crossover? So it's not a people who research don't teach well, but it's a myth too that people who must research must also teach well. That's very little correlation there. So we need to think in terms of department, and then how do we manage it? And how do we plan for good teaching in our department, in our faculty, in our institution? But it typically comes down to let's fix Professor X instead of thinking of it as a systemic issue. So you see these sorts of things now. That is the European Vice-Chancellors came out with a paper in about 2013, all saying we've got the balance wrong. We need to rebalance, we need to rethink teaching. And so teaching will need to push, stretch, innovate and excite students. We need to invest more in teaching. And then there's these typical statements about what that might mean. So what does this mean in practice for teachers? So again, a nice statement about what we need to do, but then how does it translate into actual practice for teachers? So the typical ways, and this has been going on since the 1960s, these things are the typical ways we reward and recognise teaching. And so we have awards or fellowships, some way of recognising people. You have your NUS fellowships within institutions, and often there are national ones, which I am very happy to be the recipient of. I'm not knocking them. So there are those aspects of recognising and rewarding. There's grants for teaching initiatives, and they're typically within an institution and often nationally and sometimes internationally. And so you would have some of those for your different relationships with, say, U21 or your groups, different groups of institutions, or within faculties, or within NUS, or whatever. And so Australia, we've had a number of years of quite good generosity that's now gone to zero. The third one, interestingly, very few people view it as reward and recognition. You talk to people and you say, oh, well, you get the opportunity for professional development. Oh. How much time is it going to take? Do I have to? How can I get out of it? Do I really, really, really have to? And in fact, it's considered a reward. And in every other industry, it is. But in higher education, it isn't. And I think we need to think about that. So if you're in KPMG or any of those companies, they provide professional development, and that is seen as someone who is worthwhile to invest in. Here's someone we're investing in. We'll give them time to go overseas. We'll give them time to go to a conference. We'll give them a coach or a mentor because we think they're worthwhile to invest in. Here, we see it as an imposition. And so I think that's an interesting thing, but in fact it can and should be a reward where you can get some time and some opportunity to engage in professional development. The last one is only within an institution. And let me say that the first three have been happening, as I said, from 1960. And their impact on the quality of teaching and the way teaching is rewarded and recognised is almost nil. It's changed nothing much. It's good, and they should happen, but in fact probably the reputation of teaching is even lower than before. And that's to do with that. More and more, since the 60s, the opportunity to get promoted has gone less and less from that. So it's harder than it ever was. And promotion is something that's handled within an institution only. And so you've been thinking about that, I know, but it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we're all grappling with at the moment. So here's some work that was done in 2008, and the findings keep repeating. Enhancing the value of teaching requires much more than empirical evidence of instructional effectiveness. We know what instructional effectiveness looks like. We've got years and years and years and years of research to show that. But we ignore it. And we can know it, but it won't change reward and recognition. It requires active intervention by academic leaders at the departmental, college and institutional level. Now, they're his terms from his institution. It requires effort to encourage a culture within academic programs that values teaching. And it has to be right down to the program level. Who are our best teachers? Who should be teaching these modules? Who should be leading the program? And are they the best people to do it? Or is it so-and-so doesn't have enough time allocated, we'll give them that module to teach. So it requires, whether through intervention in promotion and tenure decisions, salary structures, and provision of additional resources, active engagement by institutional leaderships is a prerequisite for teaching reform. No surprises, really. So in the end, faculty members take their cues about what their institution values, not by the rhetoric, not by the plans, not by the policies, by what actually happens in terms of salary, promotion, and tenure. Why would you not? So, what can we do about it? Institutional strategy of recognising and rewarding teaching requires a whole lot of steps, and this comes to much of the work I've been doing on my fellowship. And I've been working with institutions, over 30 in Australia out of our 39. So this is something that's a hot topic for us, that in fact no universities say we really, really want to teach badly. We want to give our students a bad experience. We'll bring them in, but we'll just ignore them when we get there. They don't plan to do it. It just sometimes happens by omission, and not generally universally, but in pockets. So these are the sorts of things many institutions are doing, and I know at NUS you've engaged in many of these things. So determine your academic and professional profile. So whether you have teaching research, teaching focus, teaching only, teaching professional, we're starting to see these positions come. They don't need to. In fact, it's a useful thing to think about what's the profile mix and do we have to designate them all by name. But I know you've gone down the choosing with the teaching focused roles or your teaching professionals. So you need to review and clarify your policies, yes. Every university I've worked with, their appointment criteria is different to their probation criteria, is different to their performance review criteria, is different to their promotion criteria. They're out of sync. And often the promotion criteria are not even mentioned through those first sections. So we really need to look at that alignment, and we should be appointing people on the criteria we want. We should be saying, how can we develop you to make sure you meet them by the time you get to end of your probation? And if you're going to progress, these are the sorts of things you need to be doing, but the criteria shouldn't change. We should know from day one of employment, these are the criteria. And we should be clear about the standards and expectations, and we're not. Partly because we haven't really come to an understanding and thought about it. It's a little bit fuzzy. Doesn't need to be, but it has been. So we need to clarify criteria, evidence and standards for teaching, research and engagement or service, depending on how you talk about it. Because it's not clear for research or service either. And we need to develop the capacity for peer review and certainly promotion panels. So often the first few steps are done and then it gets to a promotion panel where people are only used to looking at predominantly research-based ones and it's chopping off people's heads. It doesn't mean you are not focused on excellence. It is not saying that standard for teaching is less, but it is different. And unless you've got a panel that know what that difference is and have thought about it and you've interrogated it, then you're going to always find that it gets a block there. And a signal is you can try as hard as you like, but you're not ever going to get promoted. So we need to be very clear that we need to sometimes help some of our people on these panels come to a really good discussion about what is an excellent teacher and then how do we then promote those people who are. And we need to monitor and report on progress and outcomes, because if we tell people, oh yes, we do it, but we never actually show it, then again it's not believed. And so an example is the Australian University Teaching Criteria and Standards Project. And in this project, we came up with 7 criteria of effective teaching. And now, none of them are a surprise when you look at them. But have a look at them. And why did we choose these ones? because every one of them is in the service of student learning. And we did a quite extensive literature review and of what effective teaching does and what it looks like, and these came up. And in fact, the ones that came up in universities were mixtures of the first 6. People use different terms and put some together and pull them apart, but the first 6 aren't surprising. What is more surprising is the last one, professional and personal effectiveness. And very few had it in. It was sort of assumed, but the research was so strong on this is what's important. Those teachers who are passionate, who are committed, who are there, who have an interest in their students, are the ones that the students particularly appreciated and felt contributed to their learning the most. And so we put it in, and we would encourage people to think in different ways about how can we capture that. And there are good descriptors about what that might look like. But while we're at it, let's think about our research criteria. We couldn't find any university that had some. Internationally. I haven't looked at NUS, I'll commit to that now. But all we could find, I'm sure we looked at NUS, I can't remember that we definitely did. We found lists of evidence. Lists and lists, publications, citations, grants. That's evidence, that's not criteria. So thinking about whether you have criteria, because these should encapsulate your institution's values. And then all of the evidence fits in under that. But at the moment, most universities have a list of evidence to provide, not qualities, not criteria. So while we're at it, why not also help our research colleagues to conceptualise their work and come up with theirs under that, which is really what we want. We want them to think about effective leadership, mentoring and supervision. We want them to have a strategy and a plan for their research, and we don't ask it, and we should. And let's also have some for service or engagement, and think about that as well. And then having done that, let's come up with clear expectations and maybe even requirements. So this is the ORTCAS one, and don't panic because it's a bit blurry. It's all online and you can download it, and I'll give you the website for that. So as much as you want, all of that's there. So here we're saying, have a look. Criterion 1, design and planning of learning activities. And here's what we expect from an assistant lecturer. And here's what we expect from a lecturer B, and a C, and a D, and an E. That's Australian terms, but the professors are there. And we make it very clear. And the things in bold, we require. And the others are possible. So that's okay. This is indicative. And we developed up this framework, one for every criterion. And we've done some draft ones for research too, and a number of universities have done that. But it makes it clear. So you can then pull out everything under a lecturer B level in one document and say, congratulations, new employee of NUS. Here's your expectations. And over the next 3 to 5 years, you will develop these capacities. And we will help you develop this capacity. We will give you teaching grants. We will give you teaching awards. We will give you professional development. And we will give you mentors and we will give you a supervisor whose job it is to help you get there. And then when probation is finished, you're ready. And by the way, we'll check that you keep performing at that level through your annual appraisal, because we both now know what it looks like. And we can have a good discussion rather than, okay, your student feedback scores are okay, let's talk about your research. Okay? So we can talk about research, we should. And we should talk about service. And we should talk about teaching. But let's do it in rich ways. And in ways that are powerful. And by rich ways, I'm talking about this. When we think about sources of evidence, and let me say I highly value student feedback as one component under student input, because it's important. They're in front of us, they experience us, and we should use it, and we should use it productively. But we should also do self-assessment. And we should also get peers and colleagues on a whole range of dimensions. My classroom teaching, by all means. But some people aren't particularly good at classroom teaching, but by gosh, they are fabulous at designing curriculum. And so they can get peers and colleagues to provide them feedback, and so on. And student achievement. Aren't we in the business of student achievement? How much do we use that in our portfolios or in our evidence of what makes a good teacher? And there's a range of things we can use. Just as under student input, all those informal and formal ways that we gather feedback from students, a whole raft of different types. So they're the 4 sources. And we collect this at the teacher-learner level, but also at the teaching learning level, the institutional level, the program level, because they're the same 4 sources of evidence we do when we are being audited by quality agencies. We do a self-assessment. We have peers and colleagues come in and review it. We look at student achievement and student input. If we're doing international benchmarking, if you're in the business Equus program or any of those international, they use self-assessment, peers and colleagues. So these sources are trusted and have been used on multiple occasions, but we don't use them for our teaching, and we can, and we should. But we need the whole picture, particularly at the teacher-learner level. Once we get into the national level, it becomes a different quality, but they're still the same 4 sources that we draw on. And so they are critical, and they are reliably, and they are rich, and they are highly verifiable. And we haven't been using them. And this, while the article's quite recent, I went back to the 1960s and stopped, because these same 4 sources were being talked about then. But typically they were someone advocating one of these more than the other. But they've been in the sector for a while, and we use them very happily at the institutional level, but we've somehow avoided it at the teacher level. For the mathematicians amongst you and the scientists who like a formula, thinking about this, quality teaching requires competence, plus productive behaviours, times personal attributes. And if you think of those qualities or those criteria, you can see that a number are there about competence, productive behaviours, and personal attributes. And if any of them score 0, we've got it, not got quality teaching. Okay, so all of those are important. We need to think about how we develop each of those. And we can develop and enhance personal attributes. We can definitely enhance productive behaviours, but we need to know what they are and encourage them. And competence. And this is where we need to stop and think about competence. And what I'm talking about is not just competence of our teaching focused roles, our educator roles. We should have a minimum level of competence for everybody who teaches. And if so, what is that minimum level? What does it look like? So we should be ensuring that our students have at least a minimum standard, but hopefully better. But we should be thinking about that. What is a minimum standard for our teachers? And what would it look like? And they're at the minimum standards for our researchers too. And shouldn't we have the same criteria for them? Because they're all teaching. So the level that might be achieved or the extent of it might differ, but we should be thinking about, as NUS, what does this mean for us? And what is it we should be thinking about in terms of our students and what we're providing them? So we need to make sure that whatever the criteria, and let me say the criteria we develop for our project, some universities adopted completely. Others said, yeah, like yours, but we want to develop our own. But we're thinking about it. So it was based on principles. And so whatever your criteria might be, they need to be focused on the service of students and their learning. And if they're not there, they don't need to be there. They're different. And so if we're focused on students and their learning, that means as a teacher, and if that's what I'm being judged on, then that's the sort of thing that is going to improve and enhance their opportunity to learn. We can't guarantee student learning, but we can make it harder for students not to achieve it. Okay? So then we need to make sure that if they're delivering on that, that it counts in terms of their reward and recognition. Now, I've talked mostly focusing on the capacity of an institution to promote staff, but it is also we should be rewarding and recognising in lots more ways than we do. And so thinking about that and the typical ways as well as others. But if it doesn't include promotion, if it doesn't include salary, then we are continuing in the cycle that has gone before. And the ones who will suffer are our students. And so we need to think about that. And here's a challenge. The engagement of leaders at all levels of the institution, and in many respects, each and every one of us is a leader in our own particular role, whether we're a leader of a module, of a program, of a college, of a department. We all have to buy into it. And if we're not all buying into it, if it's not a consistent message, it's not going to happen. The teachers will be rightly disillusioned and say, yes, more rhetoric, no action. So that's our challenge. They're the websites, and that everything that I've talked about mostly is there. And I encourage you to go and have a look at it, because if nothing else, how do we describe those things? And we provide examples there of how you might write to each of those things, as well as lots of downloadable documents for you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, professors and eminent guests, is the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Denise. We have some time for questions. We have microphones on that side, and also we'll have people with a roving mic. So if you just indicate, we can pass you the microphone. I'm sure there must be many questions.
Thank you very much for the interesting talk. I recognize that extrinsic recognition through salary adjustments and promotion is very important, but has there been research that shows that, what about intrinsic motivation for the teacher?
That's what we've been experiencing. That's what we've already had. We've had people who are committed to their students, who continue to teach, who continue to put in lots of hours with no recognition and no reward. That is absolutely critical, and it's one of the personal attributes. But just because there hasn't been external recognition doesn't mean it shouldn't continue in that way. So we've relied on the intrinsic. We have relied on the commitment of people to their students, to the exclusion of the reward and recognition. So, and so it's patchy. So we see some people doing things because they believe in it and they value it, but we also see some people who have potential to be good teachers who turn away from it because the rewards are with the research. And so their time, if you've only got so much, where am I going to put my effort? I'd like to be an associate professor in the next 3 years. Where will I put my attention? And why shouldn't they, really? So absolutely intrinsic counts, and we've been relying on it way, way too much. And so we should have both.
Does that answer the question, Casey?
Well, just to an extent, because I think I also have very good teachers in the faculty who, despite not making it to full professor, continue to put in a lot of effort. And I was just you listed a number of rewards, grants, and recognitions through awards. And I think institutions like ours, we do have outstanding educators awards and so on. And it seems like what you're saying is that that's not quite enough because it hasn't changed, it hasn't moved the needle. And you think that the needle will really move if it comes through promotion and salary adjustments?
Well, it wouldn't hurt.
No, I recognize it wouldn't hurt. Of course it wouldn't hurt, but I'm just saying, would that really move? Is that more important than awards and so on? Because
yes, it is.
Because
Absolutely, because we've had awards since the 1960s, and we still have, and we recognise a person who's a lecturer and doing a fabulous job, but we never give them a salary increment. We give them a lump of money, whereas a promotion is ongoing because the benefit keeps going. Your salary has increased. So in terms of a signal, absolutely it matters. Your term is, yes, you've got a lot of committed teachers, and will everyone, am I suggesting for 1 minute that everyone who is a teacher will become a professor? No. And they shouldn't, just as everyone who's a researcher shouldn't be and doesn't become a professor. But we can have quite robust evidence and quite robust ways of identifying what a professor looks like in teaching if that's their emphasis. And so it's robust, it's nationally and internationally recognised, and a whole lot of things, so if you want to have a look at it. So it's not saying everyone will be promotable. And then that's where the recognition comes in. How do we recognise our good teachers? So we should have dean's lists. We should have ways in which we recognise people. We should be providing sabbaticals to people who are excellent teachers, not just good teachers. We're talking excellence here. But we need to then think about what excellence looks like. And then we need to be able to, for those who reach it for the level of promotion, that they can achieve it. And to date we haven't. And this is why we have all those people who have been stuck at lecturer and maybe senior lecturer roles with not an opportunity to progress simply because there is no structure for them. Let me say, if someone's doing their job and doing it well, that's fabulous. That's their job. It's not promotable. Okay, so I'm not in the least bit saying, be a good teacher and achieve professorhood. Be a good teacher, that's your job. Be a good researcher, that's your job. But if you want promotion, this is what it looks like. And I think we can make it clearer for both research and for teaching. And also include that aspect of entrepreneurship, service, however, because that's highly undervalued and very important for an institution. So intrinsic counts, but we've relied on it too long. And I think as long as we're clear, not everyone will want promotion. Not everyone should have promotion. But it should be there, and it should be achievable by people who do those things.
I think the criteria of judging students, I think the criteria of judging teaching according to student achievement can be difficult. I teach medical students. From year one, I could see they are not interested in the science, the why and wherefore. They want to be able to deal with the patient immediately. And I know that these will not turn out to be good doctors. And so,
Yeah.
if you judge it by student achievement,
Yes, yeah. I think behind that student achievement isn't do they pass. Well, that's one indicator, but it isn't what student achievement is about. It's do they learn? And it can be the qualities that you want, the professional behaviours. Do they achieve the professional behaviours? Do they demonstrate the commitment that you want? And so you would be making those assessments. Do they get the jobs at the end is one of those. But it is also, do they learn, and to what qualities and what values do they demonstrate? And on the whole, we've not been very good at teasing those out. We need to be very clear on those qualities. What does it take to be a professional accountant? And what are the ethics and the values that we should expect our students to at least engage in? What are the values and ethics of a doctor, of a dentist, of a psychologist, of a historian, of a linguist? And do we make sure when we assess those that they've achieved those? And we don't typically, we've not been very good at that. We've done a lot of modules, and we hope at the end when they've got enough modules that they're now cooked, they're done. But we are now exploring and saying, is that sufficient? And the answer is typically no. And one of the other achievements that we need to think about is what happens when they go out? What happens to our alumni? What happens to them out there? And are they demonstrating the qualities that we would be proud of as NUS as well? So it's very much broader than just passing a test, if you define it that way. And what we need to be very clear about is what are the qualities that we want for a person who goes from our degree in NUS, all those soft and hard, I don't like those terms, but all of those qualities as well as the content learning. And how can we be sure that we're delivering those, or at least engaging the students in the questions? We can't decide or determine their values, but we can ask them to examine them and question them against ethical principles. And a whole lot of things there that we would want our students to do, but typically it's, oh, they've got 35 modules, stamp, out you go. And we need to think that differently.
Adrian.
Hi there. Yes, I thought there was a really nice distinction in terms of sort of promotion that you clarified, in the sense that promotion with regard to research, we have robust evidence, but we've never looked at criteria. But for teaching, we've had robust criteria, but really we haven't got the same kind of robust evidence. And one of the things you pointed out was the need potentially to provide mechanisms with which we can support teachers developing that kind of evidence. You spoke about peer review, going beyond the classroom and looking at other things. Do you have examples, for instance, of how peers have been able to assess other kind of things like
Absolutely, and if you come to my workshop on Monday, we'll cover those. But there's also an article that's listed there that covers a lot of it. In our work, we identified 10 dimensions of teaching that can be peer reviewed. Classroom teaching, 1. Just 1. And so we've overemphasised the classroom teaching as being peer review without thinking about what else can and should be peer reviewed. So we should be looking at the quality of the content. And there are people who can review that. Not only is it sufficient at the level, is it indicative and broad and scoped enough? Does it fit into the program? Is it future orientated? So we can have that reviewed. And particularly if you're a program coordinator. The quality of your teaching and learning strategies. So we know that a whole lot of strategies are more effective for active engagement of students. So we can have those reviewed. On paper, these are what I'm planning. And we can say, yes, there can be people who have expertise there who can say those strategies are more likely to elicit the behaviours you want than not. Or those activities you've planned for students are more engaging and will at least push the students' learning beyond a particular part. So they can be reviewed. We can have the assessment tasks reviewed. What assessment tasks have been designed? And they can be assessed. What postgraduate supervision practice do you do? What mentoring and support do you do for tutors in your courses or in your team of teachers? What leadership do you contribute around teaching and learning? Do you lead a curriculum review and so on? Each and every one of those can be peer reviewed and should be over the course of a career. And we shouldn't be, beyond a certain point, really fussed too much about constantly reviewing people's classroom practice. Because once they've got to a certain point, rarely do they go off, you know? And so once we say, yes, they're competent in front of the class, they're engaging, they do the things we want, fine. You know, we rarely then see a professor sit down and just, you know, mark papers and say, hope you learn. So, you know, but if you, so we're thinking if we're going up the levels for being an associate professor or professor, if your expertise is curriculum design, then you would have national and disciplinary peers who would recognise that quality and have recognised your contribution to it. You would be recognised by your professional organisation. Other universities would be adopting your curriculum or coming to see it. You will have been invited by other universities to present on how you did that. So there's a whole range of ways in which peers, rather than coming in and just eyeballing and watching you, can provide feedback on whether you are recognised as a leader in curriculum design. And therefore, if it's at the national and international level, then that's a very big tick that you might have won an award for, you might be invited to work with other institutions. All of that is peer recognition, peer review from colleagues at that particular level that you are also looking for being promoted to. So does that give you a sense? So we must also conceive of teaching much more broadly. Someone I know who won the National Teaching Award, the Prime Minister's Award in Australia, was a very doer fellow. I remember someone saying, who was a professor and a head of a department of business, said, I did that person's course. We never laughed once. But he said, by God, we learned. So he wasn't charismatic. But he was a brilliant teacher, and he was recognised nationally for his teaching, for his contribution to the discipline. And he won the Prime Minister's Award for the Prime Minister's Teacher of the Year, not because he was a performer, but because he was a complete teacher. And the students, every one of them, felt he had taken them on a journey and they had learnt. And so that's where criteria matter. So we had criteria that could capture the fact that someone wasn't a star performer, but who was a teacher in the truest sense.
I just want to say something to encourage everybody. My sister Ruth was well known, and I'm number 7. I can't open my mouth, I can't speak for anything. And
I beg to differ.
but I found that because I'm not brilliant or bright or anything, I had to relate everything. And that was what I found subsequently is what my students appreciated.
Yes.
So an encouragement to all those who are as dumb as I am.
I relate to that because I was always hopeless at maths. I turn numbers around and do things. But I think I wasn't a bad maths teacher because I didn't get it immediately. And I think sometimes because you are so bright and the subjects you're in are often so easy to you that you get it and you forget what it was like not to get it. But maybe you never did not get it. Maybe through school and stuff you just got it. And here we are working with students who don't just get it. And so I relate to your story because we have to take students through who doesn't mean they won't get it. And it might mean they'll never be a star, but they might. But we need to get them to a standard. So we need to really take ourselves back to the students and find out where they are and help them along the way. And sometimes someone who it hasn't come easier to sometimes finds that they have a better way of engaging with students because they haven't got it straight away as well.
Denise, I also want to ask one quick question, if I may. That may be a difficult question, actually. And that is, in a university culture such as ours, where research is massively valued and very prestigious, and rightly so, this is a university where the discovery of new knowledge matters a lot and should do. Nonetheless, unfortunately, sometimes, as you intimated, that results in a culture whereby there's an adversarial relationship between research and teaching. So the simple question, which is difficult to answer perhaps, although maybe you'll do, I'm sure you'll do a great job,
I'll have an opinion.
is how do we make the case for recording teaching with the same kind of prestige as research already enjoys?
I think
What are some concrete suggestions that you might have?
It's a long journey, but we weren't always here. People forget, sort of the last 5 years is history. But in most universities in the 1960s, teaching and research were sort of on a par. Not so long ago. Some of us were even alive then. And so around the 60s, we started to see the emergence, even Oxford, even Cambridge. Teaching and research was valued equally. And research sort of emerged, but then the big money came in. And the Americans have a lot to answer for this. But we started to see a change where lots of money came in. Governments needed to, the arms race, or the moon race was on, and the arms race, and all of these things were all on. And so money poured into universities to do research. And that's when the balance started to change. So that's when you see Boyer write his treatise of scholarship of teaching and so on, because it was starting to get out of kilter. But prior to that, it wasn't so out of kilter. And it was what people did, and there was professional pride often in people being able to teach. Okay, they taught smaller classes, and in which case bad professors or bad teaching didn't impact so much. But now we have thousands in our class, and bad teaching really matters a lot. So the traditional strategy was to just park those professors over there, let them get on with their research, and they did. But we did create this distinction, I think, and it's very recent. So we need to think, it was different, it can be different again. The institutions that have changed and have made really good strides, and not changed from being high quality research institutions into teaching only, we need to value both. Both matter. Prestige matters. Money comes with prestige, and so on. So it's not saying research should go down, but teaching should definitely come up. And we can do that if we've got strong, consistent leadership. Not another idea. Now, you've got a new president coming on, and I congratulate you. I don't know the last one, but I did meet the new one today. But you've been quite lucky with consistent leadership. And that's a possibility that things can change. But if you've got a new president of your university every 5 years, and a new one comes in, and I've got a new idea, it's hard to achieve. But I think you've been making progress, you've been committed, you've got your leadership coming through that has in fact gone through what progress you've already made. So I think leadership makes a huge difference. What typically happens though, and I do wrap it on, I'm sorry, we get top level leadership and we get teachers here being really keen, and what happens in the middle is where it gets squashed. I'm really sorry, heads of schools make a difference. They're the ones who send a signal. Your supervisors and that middle management, so who's a head of school? Put your hand up, own up. No. But that's where it can get squashed, and typically does. So it needs to go through the institution. We all need to share this vision that this is what we need to do. And we need heads of schools to understand that not everyone's going to be the top researcher. So we need to employ people to be teachers, researchers, teacher researchers, professional staff, so that our programs are well taught and well managed, and that we get these wonderful graduates that might go on and do wonderful things in the world. So we need to think much more holistically and grow every person in our departments, in our schools. And if we don't get that middle bit right, it'll just get squashed. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Nacha?
Yeah, I have a question. Thanks for the interesting presentation. The framework that you showed about the measurements of teaching, such as self-assessment and student achievement and all of that, those are like measurement points. And I was wondering if there is a way that your university, or something that you would propose as a systematic way of measuring, from the point that a lecturer enters to,
And that's what should be happening. So we should be developing those, making them very clear, and we should be starting people from the day they walk in the institution to say, these are the important things. Some of them you will develop and go and find out yourself. Others we will help you. And typically the annual appraisal is the measurement points where you might touch base and get feedback on that. But teachers should have been proactive in getting peer feedback and gathering that data. And they should be collecting student achievement data and collecting that. So it's a constant, just as we do with research. It is an ongoing thing, but often we surprise teachers by saying, we've appointed you, oh, and by the way, 3 years down the track, you should have, or you should. And so we've typically then relied on student feedback sheets, which are fine, but they're not sufficient. And we should be in requiring 4 sources of evidence. And within each of those is a broad dimension with lots and lots of elements underneath it. You don't collect it all at once, but over a career you should be. And we should be planful about that. And as individuals, we are responsible for our career and therefore should be being actively engaged in that, with support as well.
Maybe I could have a follow-on question. How can a teaching and learning center play a role in making this possible for a faculty member?
Okay, so it's a whole university, of which a Centre for Teaching and Learning, to which I'm very committed to, has a role as well. But it must be a whole of institution. But a centre can, they're often a safe place to take people through, so they can introduce them to the evidence. And as well as the good practices. So when you're thinking about doing these teaching, here's some evidence you can collect. And by the way, why don't you invite a colleague into your classroom and give you some feedback? And I'm not really interested in what that feedback is, but what you're doing as a consequence of that. So you should be collecting that. Oh, and students give you feedback. What are they saying? Can you use that to focus on the next thing you're going to do? And can you show trends over time that that's getting better? And so a centre is particularly powerful in that, because while they're introducing new methods, they can also collect and advise on the data that you're collecting. But then we need the head of school or the supervisor to also look at that evidence and have an opinion and some advice on it as well, so that it's not just, oh, the students aren't complaining about you, you must be fabulous. So to also encourage. So we've got to collect evidence over time, and a centre should do that, but in the service of student learning. So here's good methods, here's good assessment practices, reinforced by the faculty and the school, and often in partnership with them. And why shouldn't a faculty invite people from the CLDT to come and advise all of their staff? Here's how you put together a portfolio for research and teaching and service.
Professor Chalmers, thank you very much. I'm from School of Medicine, so I echo what Professor Wong said earlier on about training the future doctors. We know in the audience there are many doctors, and they are very good doctors, but I can recall many good teachers, but they were many years ago. So if you measure their excellent teaching, they can't see the good doctors 10 to 15 years later. And we know that to measure the outcome of the students, there are multiple factors, confounding factors. So it's very difficult to say that the good teaching has impacted them to be good teachers. But offhand, I can tell you how many good teachers I had. In the first year, in the second year was taught by Prof. Wong, first year of Professor Disonagi from Sri Lanka. I can tell you straight away, but that was 30, 40 years ago. So how do we have objective, standardized methods to collect our proof of good student training, to motivate them to be good people, to be good teachers, to be good parents, to be good educators, to be good researchers?
To change the world.
So I would like to request to give us some pointers to help us to measure those things. My son is 26, but he could remember the best teacher in primary school was when he was 9 years old. And they are still in contact because she was giving feedback and writing very nice encouragement statements. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So measuring on a standardised way, I think, is a long way off, and it may never be there. There are some measures that may be standardised, like student feedback or whatever. The most powerful ones of those are at the program level, rather than always blaming or looking at a particular teacher, but we should look at teachers. So there's two questions there. One is those extraordinary teachers who impacted on our lives. And we all can name a few. People who were extraordinary. Hopefully they've had a promotion. But we're not always, and we can name quite a few really terrible people who, and that's a disaster. So I guess the goal is to be able to not name terrible teachers, step one. Extraordinary teachers will always be there, and we should have ways to recognise and celebrate them. But we should be, first of all, not having those terrible, terrible experiences that most of us can come up with. And I mean, universities are rife with the stories of the professor for the last 35 years has done X. They're legendary. They shouldn't have been. We should have sacked them years ago. Really? I mean, why did we not? So we've been quite remiss in not dealing with what has been, in some cases, legendarily bad practice. But I think by having a conversation about what makes good teaching and encouraging and identifying some of those behaviours, and on the whole it's indicative. These are things that good teachers do, and therefore we'll try and encourage other people to do them. And then we'll try and improve everybody, but so at least we're not got the terrible. So we'd want a competent minimum, if you like. And let's celebrate and let's find more of those extraordinary and excellent people. We can all name the extraordinary. They're known and they win awards, hopefully. But we're not so clear on what makes excellence, and that's an institutional conversation that needs to be had. But we do have ways to collect evidence. And I do a lot of reviews of people's portfolios for promotion, for performance issues, and I can tell you can tell the ones that are very good and who should be promoted. But it's taking the qualities that they're particularly good at and not raising some up beyond others. So we tend to raise up the performance, and that's good but not sufficient. So we should be looking holistically and being able to make judgments on those, and we can, but it's not necessarily standardised, and it probably shouldn't be, because we have such robust and wonderful people. Sorry.
Right. Thank you so much, Denise, for fielding all the questions. Colleagues, please help me in thanking Denise.
Thank you very much, Prof. Chalmers, for the wonderful lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for us to present a token of appreciation to her. We would like to invite Prof. Bernard Tan to present a token of appreciation to Prof. Chalmers. Prof. Tan, please.
Thank you very much.
Next, we would like to invite Prof. Tan to present a bouquet of flowers to the representative of the Wong family, Dr. Alan Wong. Thank you very much, Prof. Tan. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this afternoon's lecture. We would like to invite Dr. Alan Wong, PVO office bearers, distinguished guests, and our CDTL director and deputy directors to take a photo with Prof. Chalmers. Meanwhile, we'd like to invite the rest of you to enjoy the tea reception outside the auditorium. Thank you and good afternoon.